So for example, um, any of you raise your hand if you've ever used Windows Phone, like Windows Phone 7, right? All right. Microsoft was never going to be able to pull that off they were way too late to be able to really, really make an impact. But when we built that product, the leadership team that came together to do it for Microsoft, we sat down and had these debates about what we really cared about. And our first tenet was, we are going to build a phone that we want to use ourselves. Right. And so that led us in many ways. And that in that mobile ecosystem, you have the carriers and the phone manufacturers, and oftentimes a lot of mobile devices got built for the carrier or for the mobile operator or for an enterprise customer. That was something that kind of was a bad thing for Microsoft for a long time, is they were trying to build phones for enterprise customers, like almost indirectly. We said, no, we want to build a phone that we use ourselves and we love. So that was the first one. The second one is, the end user is king. And we wrote that down. And that meant anytime we got into a debate where we were arguing with ourselves about how to build something, whether we should optimize for how the carriers sold it or for how the manufacturers made it or how end customers use it, the end customer would win. So we had 3 or 4 of those tenets. And that really was something that allowed us, as we came together as a team and we started building, and we built that entire thing in 13 months, right? We were given the charter, blow up the old org, and go build a brand new mobile operating system and a set of phones. And we did that in 13 months. And in order to do that, we had to have those rules, those guidelines. And so the first thing is have a set of tenets and debate them. Like, spend the time getting in that Zoom call, or you guys are able to be in offices to some extent, and debate them and make them so that they sing to you. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is the other thing that I've seen where there's the most success and we have the most fun is where one of those tenets is about starting with the customer first and obsessing over the customer. And then working backwards from what the customer experience should be to figure out what you have to do. Oftentimes in business, people have predisposed ideas or notions around the technology that they're starting with, or they have a business model that they're starting with, and they try and make the customer experience fit those two things. And in my opinion, that's bass backwards. The right way to do it is what do you want the customer to say about what it is you're building at the end of the day? Get really clear on that, what the customer's saying, and then what needs to be true to make that happen. What do you have to build or invent or create to make that experience come true? And if the attitude of everyone involved is aligned on those, then I think you're more likely to have success.
Are there some things that you've encountered in building product that was not that intuitive, that you had to learn the hard way?
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like I've made the mistake a couple times before I finally decided I was never going to do it again. That it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them. The biggest failure that I was part of back in the early 90s, I was part of an effort at Microsoft to build a technology called the distributed component object model. It's not really even important what it did or what it was all about. It was object-oriented gunk for enterprise developers. And we had a very strong technical vision. We had a technology that we all believed was just amazing technology. And we spent almost 2 years building this technology. And we went to a big developer conference at Microsoft, and I got up on stage in front of 10,000 people, and I demoed it, and I showed them the code, and I talked about how awesome it was. And we gave everybody at that conference, all 10,000 people, a CD-ROM. This is before the internet, so the way you got software was little plastic discs. Some of you look a little younger than the rest, and you may not have experienced this. But literally, we gave them a beta on the CD-ROM, and they all went off after the thing. And 2 weeks later, we got a single, and I don't even think it was an email, I think it was a real letter from one of the customers that they had discovered that we had left a critical file off of that CD-ROM. And the CD-ROM was actually useless. It had a bug and it did not work. One customer out of 10,000 complained. And what that meant, and that was just gut-wrenching to me, it meant that we had built something without a customer. We had built something that no one really cared about, where the ethos we had was build it and they will come. And that does not work. And so when that happened, I vowed then and there that well, that's not the right way to build products. You don't build the technology and then hope the customers come. There has to be a better way. And so that's an example of where I was personally involved in something. And, DCOM ended up being useful and people used it and so forth. But what a waste of human capital and energy. It could have been so much better if we would have at least talked to customers before we started building something.
One of the things that I think a lot of folks take for granted here is that our CEO doesn't let us make a product unless she's already sold it, kind of. And that is that causes a bit of thrash on our end, but it also is we're guaranteed to have people who really actually want to use it.
Yeah.
Is that the way all good products are made now, Charlie? What's the balance?
Well, all is an absolute, and I'm not a huge fan of absolutes.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different ways you can do things, and there's different ways of optimizing. And I'm not as familiar with building in the kind of the environment that you're in, where I suspect you have a lot of very high touch clients. And in many ways, what you do ends up being a little bit like consulting, right? Mm-hmm. I'm inferring. I don't know that for sure, and I see some head nods there. And I'm not as familiar with doing that. I've tended to have built things that are very scalable products, that are truly products that then get out into the wild and are really used. And what I've found really works well in that is it's similar to the idea of having sold something and then going and building it, but it's a little bit less than that. What you do is you create that artifact that is represents the end game. Back when we were building packaged software and you buy software literally in boxes, I had my teams, as a very first thing in a product, was design the back of the box, right? All the system requirement specs, the top features of the product, everything that the customer who walked into that store and pulled the box off the shelf and looked at it would say, oh, I know what this does. I want this. And because what most people would do is they would build the product and then design the back of the box from what the product did. And that is not as effective as getting the team centered on designing the back of the box first, and then working backwards from that to figure out what needs to be true to make that happen. Now in the modern times, there's a couple other forms of artifacts. Amazon uses the press release. You write a mock press release, dated, like if you're building something you think you're going to launch in 2022, you say November 2nd, 2022, Constellation Agency launches XYZ. And then in the press release, use that customer-centric terminology that you really would use in a press release to announce a product to describe what it does. And if you do that up front and answer all the questions about what that would really mean, then you're on a good track. That's Amazon's model. Other things that I've done that have worked very well. In every industry, there are pundits. There's authors and reporters who are really well known and respected. You know, when you guys launch something, you all go to whatever the trade magazine or websites that you respect are, and you read about what they wrote about your product. And so the other thing I've done a couple of times is I've identified like a key external pundit, Walt Mossberg. You have heard the name Walt Mossberg. He's a famous PC industry a reviewer of products. And so we would sit down with the team and we would write the article we wanted Walt Mossberg to write after we shipped. What would we want him to say about this thing we have a vision for? And that could be your working backwards artifact. Another one for things that are a little bit more internal, have Newman write the email that you would write to the rest of the company celebrating the launch after it launches. Hey team, yesterday we did X, Y, and Z. We set out to do this 2 years ago and we finally accomplished it. Here's what happened. And so it's another artifact of working backwards. It's basically paint the future and then work backwards from that.
I love that, Charlie. You gave us a very specific thing. Like, you didn't just say, work together, imagine the future. You were like, no, write this document. This is a document that we used. And Charlie, I want to go back to what you said about being customer focused and like, you have to have the customer first before you build it. And now that we have one of our first iterations of our SaaS product to a major client, we do have a customer success team, and they come to us with a lot of suggestions. And we do like record and see how they actually use the product. At which point do you know better than the person using the product that, like, you know, like if we made every single edit that our customers asked us to do, it wouldn't be a product that they actually wanted. How do you determine what should make the product change versus what is the customer kind of blowing steam?
This is what we get paid the big bucks for. Like, this is the hard work, right? It's prioritization. It's creating mental models and frameworks that let you deal with that prioritization. Because remember, at the end of the day, what you're talking about, to some extent, is you could overdo it. Like, if you had infinite resources, you would build the product no one wants because you put too much in it, right? But that's not really what happens. What happens is that you have limited resources, limited time, and you have to prioritize, right? So what are you going to focus your energies on first versus later? And having a set of tenants can go a long ways. If you can develop those tenants up front, where you've articulated based on what you know about the market, what you know about customers at a high level, what you know about the vision of where you want to take this thing. If those tenants are debated and aligned across that, then when you get down to those decisions on which feature to build or not build, you can look at the tenants and they're a filter, right? Well, we agreed early on that, let me see if I can come up with one that's interesting for your space. We agreed early on that that the long-term value for the company is centered on how cars are sold through traditional dealerships. I'm not saying this is the right tenant. I'm just using it as an example. And thus we will only invest in things having to do with telematics in extreme circumstances or in highly considered circumstances. So if that's your tenant, then you're going to get a feature where you're going to get a request from a customer where they say, we want you to integrate with telematics. And you're going to go, we already agreed that's not where we focus our energy. So can we have a really quick conversation of how big an opportunity that really is for our business? And if it isn't one where it's obvious, well, we're just not going to do it. Say no to that one. So again, your tenants come back as something you use over time as a filter and a reinforcer. The other thing about listening to customers and being customer obsessed, you use the word, Lisa, of customer focus. And I sort of cringe when I hear that, because I don't think customer focus is enough. You need customer obsession. You need to have everyone in the company be kind of insanely obsessed about making customers successful. And for example, having a customer success team is awesome. You should have that. But you can run the risk of leaning on the customer success team too much versus making sure that everyone in the company is out of the building and engaging with customers, and obsessing about them and understanding them. Sometimes that's harder to do than it is to say, because of geography and where customers are. But there's another thing that helps with that I found is to create that mentality in an organization and that culture of customer obsession, is to recognize that anytime you're interacting with someone else, they're your customer. So my mental model for this call is, you're my customers, right? And so I started the call off by trying to ask questions and understand you better, so I can optimize what I say in this call. And so you should perhaps do that internally, right? Every time here's a good example. You're all familiar with meetings that don't work very well, right? You get involved in a meeting and there's no agenda and there's no action items and no one understands why the meeting's happening. That is a failure. You should view it this way. That is a failure of the organizer of the meeting of being customer obsessed. Because if they were truly customer obsessed, they would have taken the time to make sure it was clear what the meeting was all about, why it was on people's calendars, and then they would have been customer obsessed in delivering the meeting and executing on it. And if they couldn't find a reason for that, they would have also been customer obsessed and said, here, have your time back. We're not going to have this meeting, right? And so when you think about this concept of obsessing over customers, if you can build the organization so that everyone, anytime they're interacting with someone, they're thinking about, how do I obsess over this? How do I really make sure I'm delivering in every facet of it? Then the interactions with the real customers will be even more meaningful. And I've seen that repeated over time.
That's amazing. And that makes total sense, Charlie. And in customer obsessed fashion, I have a few questions lined up for you from my customers here, my colleagues at Constellation. And Adam, one of our lead engineers here, has 2 questions for you that are pre-approved. Adam, are you here on the call? We'd love for you to ask questions.
Hi, how's it going? So forgive me, I want to get the wording correctly. Okay, so here we go. So I'll start. Should I ask both of them or like?
I think both are great.
Okay, because they might be a little long-winded. But so here's question 1. When pressured with reaching a deadline while also aiming to make the best tech that you can, how did you decide what to focus on to release in order to release a product on time?
Great question. Again, this is why they pay us the big bucks.
Yeah.
Because this is where the rubber hits the road being hard, because you have this triangle of quality, resources, and features, right? And that triangle is just is there. It's always true. So one of the key things is figure out how to build quality in from the beginning. And the more that this, I use the phrase push quality upstream, right? It used to be a lot, or there's been a lot of examples of software and technology built where quality was measured at the end when the thing was shipped or near shipping. Suddenly you do a big beta test and you find all the bugs, and then you go try. That's pushing quality downstream. The more you can invest in your systems and your mentalities and your people to make sure that you're doing the quality work upstream. And that starts with design. Like, are you designing the right operational excellence mechanisms for your cloud software so that you build in the analytics and monitoring and metrics at the very beginning versus waiting to the end? It's another example. There's a a dream, a utopian world around continuous integration and continuous deployment, where you're literally able to have a developer deploy something new to customers in the instant. They recognize a change, they're able to deploy it, write the code, check it in, and within milliseconds, it's in customers' hands. That's the dream that we all want to get to. And if you can use that as your dream, you can asymptotically get closer to that. You'll be actually doing things that are better at pushing quality to the right, pushing quality upstream. And so that's the first part thing that I'd suggest there. The second thing is people use the term minimum lovable product or minimum viable product a lot. And I think it's a good mental model for thinking about how to make sure you're building just the essential you need to in order to get it in front of customers. I'm more preferential to minimum lovable product because I don't think any customer wants something that's just viable. That doesn't sound very appealing to me as a customer. And so the question is, what do you truly mean by minimal? What do you truly mean by lovable? And those are things you can debate as a team and get clarity on. And being really hardcore on the minimal is something that is hard to do, but can be really, really beneficial. I think back of all the stuff that I've built over my career and the projects I've been involved in, the products I've launched, and I really struggle to find a single example where we launched it and then said, I wish we had done more. It just doesn't happen. You launch it and you discover you did too much. You didn't have to add that extra bell or that other whistle. You could have actually had the discipline to say no. And still, you could have delighted customers and gotten all the feedback and learning you need to get to the next level. And so I'd encourage you to be more hardcore about getting to the minimum in order to have that lovable experience for your customers. Is that helpful, Adam?
That's actually very helpful. These kind of ideas swirl around our heads as developers, but like, I guess we don't really take those ideas and put them into a cohesive like sentence or like paragraph. And I think you just did that for me. So thank you.
Are there product managers on the call?
There should be.
Yep.
Raise your hand if you're a product manager.
I don't know if you can
David,
see everyone.
Ish. Zach, got it. Another thing relative to that is for there to be this culture, and you Jack and Dave, you guys can lead this, which is at the end of the day, the only thing that truly benefits the customers, the only people that do the work that truly impacts the customers are the people who write the code or design the hardware. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's the customers interacting with those bits that were written by software developers. And if you have that mental model, you're like, yeah, that's true. Then your job, you exist to help those developers do magic. And how do you do that? Well, you make it easy for them to say no. You have to have the discipline to be able to not ask for too much, but for you to use the data you're collecting and everything to narrow the problem down so that the bare minimum requirements are specified. So that's a thought on that. It may not apply to your guys' situation, but.
Noman definitely laughed when you said that, Charlie. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. It's really, it's easy almost in a way to build everything, and finding that minimum lovable product, like you mentioned, it's a challenging task, but it definitely is where the focus should be.
Yeah, and it's funny you said that. It's easy to build everything, but that's counter to the quality thing, right? Because we all know that it's the last 10%, which is the hardest 90%. Right? And so if you build everything just as scaffolding in high level, you're going to have what we call infinite bugs, right? And so you have to have that discipline and recognize that saying no is really powerful. It's hard to do.
And I know, Charlie, this is an eye-watering amount of people to only have 2 PMs on the call. So I want to let you know that I'm training my entire ops team to be PMs, and they'll be ready to go.
Well, it's not a bad thing, because you want everyone to be customer obsessed, right? And if you over-index on product managers or program managers, you're actually disempowering people to some extent. So I built big PM organizations. I understand that. I've also done it, and it's you have to navigate it and have a balance.
That's what they, I guess, pay me the big bucks for here, to find the balance. Like I promise you, Noman and Matt and Diana, that's what I'm up to. Adam, did you ask your second question?
No, I didn't, but this is a great follow-up, like speaking of balances and stuff with between teams and like saying no to things. So so while you're working at Alexa, like working with Alexa, right? Was there a time that the stakeholders wanted to move forward with something like, say, a new feature or like a patch or like a fix or like a design change that the dev team was against? And like, how was this handled? And was there like a voting session or discussion? Or like, did the stakeholders have the final say? Like, how did you manage that?
Yes, but I'm not sure it's helpful to talk about it in general terms. Can we make this a more specific conversation by either talking about like the layer in the stack you're talking about, or the type of customer experience you're talking about?
Well, yeah. So, for example, Alexa is essentially an AI, right? So, but nowadays it's more geared towards, you like have Amazon Echo and everything. Was there a point where the developers wanted to take it and make it really fancy with the AI, like use it for a bunch of things? I know this is really general, but now, like, it's more like, at least from my experience with it, I think of it as one of those things. Oh yeah, Amazon Echo is just a thing you have in your house that like plays music for you, And was there a point developers disagreed with this sort of idea and like no, it has to be like a whole smart home kind of thing, or like a whole AI implementation?
It's unfortunately, it's a bad example for think what you're really trying to get at, and here's why. When Alexa was first launched and the Echo and started to take off, it was pretty clear to all of us involved that this was going to be a really big deal, and that Amazon was an opportunity to be out in front. And the Amazon mentality around that is, when you're out in front like that, you pour gas on the fire. Yeah. You double, triple, quadruple down. You go, you go, you go. And so our strategy really was do everything. And we were pretty much given a blank check. And it was a little bit of, damn the torpedoes, like just go. So there really wasn't very much that was off limits. Sorry.
Nice.
It's not a great example.
I mean,
but let's talk about privacy. Because it's one where it was relevant, where there were ambitions to create customer experiences where, in order to create that experience, the sacrifices would have to be made on maintaining customer trust, or where it would get creepy. We use the term creepy a lot. Like we had a tenant, don't be creepy. Right. And oftentimes there was a capability where when you implemented it, it passed that creepy bar. Right. But this goes again back to having a set of tenants. We were able to navigate that for the most part by going back and looking at those original tenants we've written down and saying, well, that'll cross the don't be creepy line. So let's not do that at this point in time, or let's do it in a way that isn't creepy. But I've engaged with product organizations enough to hear the question you're asking and know there's an undercurrent of that of the debates you have. And without talking about specifics, it's hard to really navigate it. But since it's a common pattern, I can tell you what the common solution is.
Yes, that'd be great.
I suspect you're not actually debating the real issue. You're debating something that is a symptom or something that's in the margins. And as a team, you need to go and bubble your thinking up to the next level of the company or the bigger organization's true goals, true motivations, and tenets, principles, and debate those, argue those. And out of that, you'll find that there's a more powerful first principle or guiding principle that will allow you to navigate this little thing you're arguing about, which is really on the margins. There's probably a fundamental misalignment amongst the people that I see in these squares on my screen that you all haven't really surfaced yet. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. Every organization has things where people aren't aligned. What I would suggest you do is spend the time trying to find out what that bigger issue is, and then debate that.
Now,
It'll make you a far more effective organization.
and Charlie, when you talk about first principles, do you mean first principle trademark Aristotle Kantian, or do you mean is that something else?
I think it's a little bit of a euphemism. You've all been in conference rooms and meeting rooms where you're trying to solve a problem with people, and someone in the room says, "Hey, let's step back and get back to first principles." And you do that for a while, and you suddenly find that this thing you were arguing about, debating about, is much more clear, and you get to alignment faster. That's what I'm talking about. It's that thing we tend to do implicitly, and some people do it more naturally than others, where you go back to the fundamental ideas and use that as your grounding. And it turns out there's a skill involved in doing that, and you have to do it more explicitly. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And you'll find suddenly that navigating these problems is much easier.
That's great. And I'll turn it over to Noman now. I know he has some questions for you about building the team further.
Yeah, well, thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, and there's roles. I mean, you were talking about product managers, and it's very hard to understand from an hour or even a 3-hour conversation or multiple conversations whether someone can be a good product manager, and whether someone even if they can be a good employee for your collaboration and what you're trying to do. What are some things that you've learned that stand out to you in some of the tenets, so to speak, when it comes to building a team or recruiting, and specifically for leaders or team members that you really want to take to spearhead initiatives or objectives on your team?
That's a great question. The things that over time my pattern matching has gotten stronger and stronger on, and I tend to look for, it's probably one way to answer this question, are, and this applies to almost all disciplines. You mentioned product and program managers, but I think it applies to everybody in a builder organization. The first is a servant leader mentality. It goes back to the customer obsession thing I talked about before. Being motivated to get stuff done because you're helping others by doing it. That servant mentality attitude. Another way of saying the same thing is, listen, nobody likes to be in an organization that's labeled as political, right? You hear this all the time, I don't want to get involved in politics, right? The reality, though, is that if you think about what the definition of politics is, it's really all about influencing others. And from that, it turns out there's actually 2 types of politics. There's good politics and there's bad politics. Bad politics are defined by people who are self-serving. And they do things and they influence others for their own benefit, their own personal benefit. And it ends up being nefarious and it's trust busting. That's actually fairly rare because most people are good. And so the vast majority of what people call politics is really just influence. Raise your hand if you're a parent or you have a pet. You are very, very clued into the concept of being manipulated, and having a politics applied to you. If you have a baby, the baby is freaking manipulating you constantly. They've learned what you react to, and when they cry and they scream, they are manipulating you. So politics are everywhere. And again, the distinction is whether it's used for self-serving reasons or for the greater good. And so the other thing that you want to identify in people is people who are really good at influence. They're really good at taking an idea, whether it's their idea or someone else's idea, and getting other people bought into that idea. The best product managers in the world that I've ever worked with were excellent at making engineers think the idea was their idea, right? But they did it in a healthy, trust-earning way. And that's something that you can interview for and you can identify when you meet people, and whether or not they're inclined to always be building trust in the way they influence others. So that was the first one. The servant leader mentality combined with earning trust in the way you influence. The second one is, I'd probably say, attention to detail, dive deep. You can't make good decisions purely based on opinion and instinct. Opinion and instinct is really important. Like, you can't dismiss it either, but you have to have data. You have to have the details. You have to know as much data as you can. And so people who are willing to roll their sleeves up and dive into the fundamentals, the data, are really important. And so, like, I'll ask in interviews, I'll ask for an example of a time where someone dug deep into data. And what I'm looking for is, yeah, I went and researched customers, and I ended up with a spreadsheet with 500,000 rows in it. And then I spent 3 days going through every row in that spreadsheet and building formulas to extract the data out of it. And I did it myself. Like, that's an example of a product manager, for example, who knows how to dive deep. And from an engineering perspective, are examples where you can articulate where you went all the way down to the metal to understand that it wasn't a bug in the compiler or in the chip, right? It's an example of dive deep. So those types of things are really important. And then I'll just do one more. I could probably do a dozen more of these, but I'll do one more, and I'll pick. Learn and be curious. It's an Amazon leadership principle. I think the people who are the most effective in building stuff are those that are always eager to learn something new. And it comes from two things. One, it's learning new skills or new technologies or domains, but it's also recognizing they're not always right. That the opinions they have, the vision they have, can be challenged, and it's okay for it to be challenged, and they're willing to listen and potentially change their opinion. I love the saying, have strong opinions weakly held. So, is that helpful?
Now when you hear me say
Extremely.
that, y'all know that came from Charlie.
Have strong opinions weakly held?
Yeah, I say that all the time. We have two more questions for you, Charlie. One is from our program manager, David Morgan, product manager, David Morgan, and Sebastian, who is new to our team as our head of UX. So I'll let David go first.
Hi, guys.
Great. Hello. So you talked about a little bit how like we would identify what a good product manager would be from like a hiring perspective, from building out a team. But Jack and I are pretty young. I wouldn't say we have a ton of experience in that area, and we've been learning on the fly. What would you say if you were to bring someone that's never done any product management experience, like you bring them on your team, how would you, what skill would you tell them to like learn first, figure out how to do this perfectly as they continue to enhance existing products and build out new products?
Learn the skill of that's the best way to put this. Learn the skill of how to be indispensable to your engineers. And there's a lot involved in that, but the behaviors you want to see when you become successful is that where'd he go on the screen? I don't remember his name. Adam. Where'd Adam go?
Hello. I don't know.
He's still here. There he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, right below David. I don't know if you guys are on the same team or not, but I'm going to pretend you are.
We are.
There's a bunch of skills where the behavior is that anytime that Adam has a question or is unsure of something, his first instinct is to go to you. If you can master that, you will succeed. Now, you don't want to go so far in that Adam isn't able to think on his own and he just becomes an order taker. Because as I said before, the magic comes from the engineers inventing and building the stuff that the customers actually use. And to make that happen, engineers have to be left to their own devices to build. And so there's a skill in navigating that. Because if you go too far on that way, you fall into the trap, which is what happens when engineers truly are left to their own devices. They build the most complicated thing they can, right? This is why the product management discipline is so important, is that it allows engineers to find that place where they can create magic, but stay on the rails that are relevant for the business. It's interesting, oftentimes people hear that, ask that type of question, and they expect to get an answer around, how to design wireframes or be good at diving into customer data. Those things are all true, but the most fundamental one for you to be successful is figure out how you can make your engineers that you're paired with successful.
Great, thank you. That was extremely helpful, actually.
And you may be there more than you think. So Sebastian, we're ready for you.
Cool, thank you. I've only been here a week and a half, but I can speak that already. Like both David and Jack are invaluable and they're like my go-to people. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, like you mentioned that the importance of being able to, manipulate in a good way and letting people that are better influencing others making decisions. And I wanted to ask if you could speak to how do you balance like really empowering those people while also allowing team members that have different personalities but are like highly skilled and have great ideas to feel comfortable and confident that they can have input and have their voices heard and make decisions.
I'm sounding like a broken record to a little extent on this. Getting everybody involved in the drafting the definition of the tenants and the debating them is really important. Because if everybody has had a say in the wording that is used and they've helped debate it, there'll be earlier buy-in on the fundamentals, the core value. And by the way, you may find in some cases where someone's just not aligned with them. What a great filter. That person probably should go and have a great career somewhere else, right? If they're not aligned with those fundamental things. And so that's a good thing. So get people involved in those debates early. Another really key thing is to also have really open and clear, transparent conversations about roles. Not only what your role is, like what you are supposed to be focused on, but also what isn't your job. It turns out people love being told what not to do. And oftentimes the ambiguity we have in organizations is because people have so much ownership. They want to help so much that they end up working on stuff that they're not really supposed to be focused on. And they'll actually really appreciate hearing, hey, we're going to trust Sandra over here on this because that's her role. And by the way, she might fail. Sorry, Sandra. She might fail at it, but damn it, she's got it. And we're going to support her. We're going to find out, why she failed and then fix that. Don't try and fix it for her. That's not your job. That type of conversation. I have no idea, Sandra, what you do, but you're the first person I looked at when I had that come up. So, but does that make sense, Sebastian? That you've got to have those clarity of roles. And the second thing is it's okay to let colleagues fail. It actually is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. That was like very helpful. Just like very quick follow-up. Like I'm sure you've been in situations where the loudest voice in the room carries the day. And I would love some advice on how to like tips, because sometimes I have a tendency to do that, then I regret it afterwards. On tips on how to allow people that have great ideas just to come forward, who might not have like a like dominating personality or might be shy and things like that.
I have found, and I learned this at Amazon, and it really, really does work. And this is why using the written word is so important. When you're working on something where there's an important debate, using a vocal, visible presentation style to drive the conversation just doesn't work. Because you're enabling the person with the loudest voice, the most vivacious person to potentially sway people by using emotion versus the actual data. And so Amazon has this culture where every meeting starts with a written document, no more than 6 pages long. It's kind of BS, but no more than 6 pages long, that for the first 20 minutes of the meeting, everybody sits in silence and reads. And then the leader of the meeting steps them through debating what was written in the document. And it lowers the anxiety and the temperature, and you get a focus more on the topics. And the person who's really used to pounding on the table, and they get muted to some extent. Now, it means you also have to all learn how to be great writers and readers, but that's a skill everybody wants. So,
well, Charlie, in our last minutes, I want to hand it over to Jack, our PM, with a burning question for you from our small company to your large company mind.
For sure. So, Charlie, as you've heard, we have one dev team and essentially one product manager and one project/program manager. So we all work on 5 or 6 product lines. And my question to you is, with the smaller organization, individuals are often encyclopedias of knowledge that only they sort of know, and often leads to becoming blockers when they're in meetings or like take PTO. And I know this across the teams, there's individuals like that. How was this resolved or dealt with from your experiences in the past? And like, how do you suggest us move more away from that as we become bigger of a company?
a couple things that have helped me in the past on that is one, actually investing and taking pride in your own internal knowledge management system. You guys have a wiki?
maybe. Yes. but
Or
for
is
some
is all this knowledge codified in old Slack conversation?
I just created wikis when I came here 3 months ago. So
Yeah.
What do you use for tracking issues? You use Jira or something like that?
Jira, yeah. Well, we use Jira, and from Wikis, we've gone from Confluence to Google Drive to Notion now, which Lisa just brought in, which is actually working quite well, I think.
So the point that I'll make is that picking one, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. They're all tools, and they all can be forced fit to serve your needs. But pick one, not multiple, one. And then everybody take pride in keeping it up to date and making it a living entity that you all know you can go to. And the stuff that you own, keep it up to date. Stuff that is stale, delete it. And leadership has to play a part in this. When I started my last job at Control Force Snap AV, it was actually one of the first things I did is I took over the wiki, and I went and edited hundreds of pages, and I deleted old stuff, and I created a top level framework that mapped my mental model. And then I got my direct reports and others to take over their sites, and I held them to it. I'm like, God, your page is ugly. Like, and it has no useful information. This stuff's like 6 years old. Like, when are you going to update that? So that having that will help, because as you grow and you scale, you just can't be in a situation where you have these critical functions where the only place the knowledge is in people's heads. And if there's employees that think that's okay and they want to continue that, well, they're holding you hostage. And that's bullshit. So don't be that person. Be wanting to get it out. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you asked the question in a fairly broad way. There could be 100 examples of this, or there could be 10. Go through the exercise of creating the inventory of them. Like, don't make it a general conversation. Make it a specific conversation around the 7 topics that are the ones where you're the most worried that there's this institutional knowledge that's locked up in someone's head. Then prioritize those 7. Pick the top 3 and go fix it. Again, it's not magic, but treating it as a general problem where it's just this ephemeral thing that's all over the place isn't going to help you track it down. Break it into smaller pieces, prioritize, and then nail the top ones.
this has been amazing, Charlie. It's like a free masters. Thank you so very much.
I'm happy to do it. It's good to meet all you. I love learning a little bit about what you are up to. And let me know if I can help more. I got a lot of time on my hands right now, so use me.
That's
amazing. Yeah, appreciate it.
If you don't mind, Charlie, I mean, we might all be in touch and reach out to you and be like, hey, you said this. I was too shy to ask you this, but what do you think about that? Would that be all right?
Absolutely. If you go to my website, kindle.com and /services, I have a link there. I do this crazy open and free office hours thing. It's open to anybody. It's only constrained because I block off only a certain amount of time every week to do it. But that's a great way. I'm happy to do it.
For one-on-ones with us. Wow. Thank you so much, Charlie.
It's an experiment I'm running that's kind of weird, but it's actually been really fun.
We are about to end that experiment because we're about to abuse it. Thank you so much for being with us, Charlie. We hope you have a lovely rest of your morning in Seattle. And we have so much to take away and to build here at Constellation.
Awesome. It's really cool what you guys are all doing. Nice to meet you, and have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Thanks.
Sorry for
Bye.
picking you on, Sandra.